Alabama has produced a ton of great defensive linemen over the past few years, and I'm going to mention a few names. Guys like Quinnen Williams, Dalvin Tomlinson, Isaiah Buggs, Christian Barmore, Raekwon Davis, Ashawn Robinson, Ryan Anderson, and Jonathan Allen all come to mind. I could go on and on about how many defensive linemen and how many good players they have produced, but there's a guy who is largely forgotten in terms of that group. Since the turn of the century, he has the second most amount of sacks in a career for an Alabama player, and is top 10 in Crimson Tide history and top 20 in SEC history. He was a first-team all-conference selection, a surefire first-round pick, and one of the next great Bama players to do well in the NFL. Unfortunately, his career never panned out in the league like many expected. His stock would fall on draft night, and he's one of the more forgotten Alabama star players of this decade. In today's video, we're going to talk about his career, his rise as a player, and what went wrong for him. So without further ado, let's get started. The player we're going to be talking about in today's video is a defensive lineman by the name of Tim Williams. He was the top player coming out of the state of Louisiana in his class, had a stellar career for the Crimson Tide, and his ceiling was supposed to be ultra high in the NFL. But before he had a spectacular career with the Tide, we need to go back in time and see how Williams became a big-time prospect to begin with. In order to understand who Tim Williams is, let's go to where he was born, Baton Rouge, Louisiana. He grew up with a love of football and was a natural athlete. He loved hitting people, tackling people, and he was just a force. He'd eventually take his talents to University Laboratory High School, which, in case you don't know, is legitimately across the street from the LSU campus. Now stop and think for a moment just how close this guy was to the LSU program. Think about how he was the #1 player in the state of Louisiana and how he went to Alabama instead. So yeah, this is going to be a pretty interesting story, and stay tuned to find out why he did not become a Tiger. He obviously was a big name, and the LSU staff had been watching him for years. Les Miles apparently recruited him extremely hard and did everything except ask him to commit on the spot. He was supposed to be the home state guy to start out their 2013 recruiting class, but then all of a sudden LSU started to back off. For a while, many people cited character concerns and grades as the reason why LSU stopped recruiting him, but if you take a moment and examine that, it doesn't really make sense. The other schools that were recruiting him pretty hard were Alabama and Miami and Florida State, all of which have higher academic standards than LSU. At the time, Miami was a top 50 academic institution, and why would he be able to get into their school but not into LSU, who was ranked in the 100s? Alabama was also a top 100 school, and with how good of a player he supposedly was, there's no reason why they wouldn't do everything they could to get him into the school. Secondly, they cite character concerns, but Les Miles had a track record of recruiting players who didn't exactly have the best off-the-field character. Darius Geis, for example, got into a ton of trouble in high school. Jeremy Hill got in massive trouble before he signed there, and Zach Mettenberger got in a lot of trouble before he transferred to the Tigers. This led many to believe that LSU just didn't want Tim Williams, and they did not think he was good enough to play for them. One guy named Ian Cannon apparently said on Twitter that he said, quote, "I don't think Tim Williams will ever play it down for Alabama because of off-the-field issues." And another guy from SB Nation said, quote, "I'm not impressed with Louisiana defensive end Tim Williams. He has a very small frame, and he can see why LSU won't take him." So basically the narrative at this point was that he wasn't good enough to play for LSU. Well, they would regret this. At this point, Williams would narrow his school choices down to Florida State, Miami, and Alabama. He would eventually take a visit to Tuscaloosa, and he was apparently very impressed with what Alabama had going on, and named them the leader in his recruitment. Not surprisingly, less than 24 hours later, Williams went on to take a step further and committed to the Crimson Tide. He chose them over the likes of the Miami Hurricanes, Florida State Seminoles, and LSU Tigers, amongst other big-time offers. He said he chose Alabama because, quote, "At Alabama, I know all of the coaches, and they've been recruiting me since my 9th grade year. I know Coach Saban well, I know Coach Burns well, and Alabama was the first school to start looking at me, and they gave me my first offer." Nick Saban always has an eye for talent, and even if a player kind of has off-the-field issues, him and his staff can usually get the most out of the player, and the culture at the program usually forces someone to get their life together. If not, they won't be on the team for long, and Williams knew what it meant to go to Alabama, as it meant he could have the best coaches, play on the biggest stage, and likely get to the NFL. So yeah, he was a good player, but what did recruiting sites think of him? Well, according to 24/7 Sports, Tim Williams was a 4-star recruit, the #3 weak side defensive end, and the 83rd best player in the class of 2013. He'd be taking his talents to Bama, but off-the-field issues would haunt him to start his career. When he arrived at Alabama, he was seen as a great player, but wasn't going to have a huge role as a freshman. In 2013, he would appear in a total of 3 games and make 3 tackles. Not the greatest start in the world, but he was only a true freshman, and he was obviously buried behind a ton of great players. Going into his sophomore year, though, he would get into some trouble. He was suspended alongside 2 other players, and would miss a total of 21 practices, and there was not a whole lot of detail about why he was suspended. In 2014, his numbers really wouldn't go up at all, as he would appear in 4 games having 5 total tackles, but he would have 1.5 sacks. 2015 is when things would go pretty well for him, as in his first 5 combined games for the Tide, he would register 3.5 sacks. From there, he'd have a sack against number 2 LSU and help them win that game, and then 1.5 sacks against number 17 Mississippi State. He'd have 2 in their Iron Bowl victory over Auburn, and then 2 more in their win over number 18 Florida in the SEC championship game. Before the season, he was projected to have a big year, as one of his teammates, Ryan Anderson, had this to say, quote, "Everybody around here knew what kind of player Tim is, and what kind of player he can be, and what kind of player he's going to be. He's a phenomenal pass rusher, and I feel like he's focused more, and he knows what's at stake. He wants to take care of his family, he wants to be great, and it's starting to show for him." In his breakout junior season, he only played on the most obvious pass rush situations, and it would have 9.5 sacks, which was second on the team to Jonathan Allen, who had 10. He recorded at least a share of a sack in his final 8 SEC games of the season, and had 2 apiece in 3 of their more important games against Mississippi State, Auburn, and Florida. Because of that, Alabama was obviously great, and they would make the college football playoff. From there, they would shut out Michigan State, but he would not appear in their national title game. From there, he was given a late first-round grade by the NFL Draft Advisory Board, but Nick Saban told him to come back and play a larger role in the 2016 season, and Tim Williams would announce that he would come back for his senior campaign. Looking back, it really didn't affect him that much. He'd pretty much register a sack or a half sack in every single game he played in 2016, but defenders had figured him out a little bit more, and he only finished the regular season with 8.5 sacks and 1 fumble. He would lead them to the SEC championship game once again, where they would smoke number 15 Florida, and they would get back to the college football playoff. Against number 4 Washington, he'd register a half sack in their 24-7 win over the Huskies, and then in his final game, they'd play against number 2 Clemson, and they'd lose by way of the Deshaun Watson pass to Hunter Renfrow. This was a very emotional moment for Tim Williams, as he did not register a single sack in that game, and it would be the final play of his career. He finished Alabama as the 7th all-time player in terms of sacks, and would also go down as a top 20 sack leader in SEC history at the time. But there was more trouble on the horizon for him. Right before the 2016 season, he was actually arrested by Alabama campus police for carrying a pistol without a permit. This seemed to go under the rug a little bit, but then there was a report that would come out that would really hurt his 2017 NFL draft stock. Charlie Campbell from WalterFootball.com had reported that Tim Williams had, quote, failed many drug tests, and he had a serious substance abuse problem. They compared it to the likes of Randy Gregory, who, in case you don't remember him, was a consensus top 10 pick from Nebraska, but he had substance problems and would fall to day 2 of the draft. Williams was considered a consensus first-round pick, and some had him as high as a top 10 pick, but now this was all in jeopardy. He had had a substance problem, was caught with marijuana, and had a pistol without a permit, and this all led to his stock falling in 2017, and draft night would not go according to plan. He ended up falling all the way to the 3rd round, as he was taken with the 78th overall pick by the Baltimore Ravens. He was compared to the likes of Elvis Dumervil, and some said that the Ravens got a steal with him. He had a ton of hype going into his Baltimore Ravens career, but his rookie season would not go according to plan. He'd only appear in 5 games, registering a total of 6 tackles and 0 sacks. To his defense, he did have a hamstring injury, but 2018 was going to be a big season for Tim, and people wanted to see what he could do. Not much would change, as he would only appear in 6 games, registering a total of 10 tackles with 2 sacks. But so far through 2 years, Williams was a bust. 2019 would be his last chance to get his game together, and he would appear in a total of 1 game before he was waived. To be fair, he also had hamstring issues during the 2019 season, but he was cut and immediately picked off waivers by the Green Bay Packers legitimately 1 day after he was cut. But sadly, 3 days later, the Packers decided to release him and sign him to his practice squad. He did not appear for them, and was waived before the 2020 season. Near the end of September, he was signed by the Seahawks practice squad, but was released a couple days later. And going into the 2021 season, he is signed with the Saskatchewan Roughriders of the Canadian Football League. In his entire 4-year career, he only played in 20 games, had 18 tackles, and 2 sacks. Tim Williams was a bust. So what exactly went wrong for him, you may be asking? Well, he obviously had all the physical talent in the world, but the red flags off the field did not help him. It didn't really matter if he went in the first round or the third round like he did, he could just never put it all together. He was a physical freak who had the production and motor in college to be good, but according to my research, he just didn't seem to have the motor in the NFL. He didn't want to be the best, he didn't have the greatest work ethic, and injuries did not help him. I don't know if that's 100% true, but that is just what I saw, and if you know something different, feel free to let me know down in the comment section. Tim Williams will go down as one of the most ferocious pass rushers in Alabama football history, and is most likely forgotten by most college football fans. Probably should have left after the 2015 season and taken advantage of his late first round to early second round stock, and maybe things would have been a little bit different for him, or maybe he would have gone to a team that would have gotten the most out of him. But we will never know. What do you guys think though? Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section. Let me know another player I could take a look at next. Subscribe if you love consistent college football content. Hit that like button if you want to support today's video, and check out all my other videos on the end screen, including my video about the forgotten Alabama wide receiver, Richard Mullaney. I hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.